good evening. You're watching Primetime Debate. I'm Tamanna. Now, the government has cleared 49% foreign direct investment in Air India, bringing the national carrier on par with other private airlines. The move comes at a time when the government is considering ways to sell stake in the ailing public sector airline that carries a heavy debt burden. Interestingly, this announcement is coming just days after a report in the Press Trust of India of a parliamentary panel suggesting that Air India should not be sold at all. Now, remember, this report has not been tabled yet, but reportedly it says that till 2022, Air India should not be sold because the money that has gone into it so far has been piecemeal. So should the Maharajah be sold in its current form? Will it be made easier after this 49% FDI easing? To talk about this, I'm joined this evening by Aijaz Ilmi of the BJP and Mohammad Khan of the Congress. In a little bit, we'll be speaking with Jitendra Bhargav, a former ED at Air India as well. Welcome all. Mr. Ilmi, I'm going to start with you and ask you what the plan really is. Because even as the government's stated purpose is to push towards the sale, at least the part stake sale in Air India, there are a lot of hiccups and challenges coming ahead. Do you see this parliamentary panel report as one more challenge?
Well, the fact that the parliamentary panel report is, I think, one of the smaller problems that this government has. Yeah. It's very clear that the way and the condition of Air India that it is in presently, and with the kind of mounting burdens of debt and capital infusion required, the intent of the government is, for the last 6 months after the cabinet decision, has been very, very clear that we need to work towards a strategic disinvestment and that Air India should be in private hands. And the private sector is definitely better equipped to run a smooth, efficient airline than the government has been over the last so many years.
You know, Mr. Mohammad Khan, I just want to come to some of the key points on that parliamentary panel and report. And it is, of course, a panel of all parties that have participated in it, not just the opposition. And it talks about giving at least 5 more years to revive Air India and its debt being written off. Now, at this time, is that even a fair assumption considering the amount of money already sunk into the public sector airline?
Well, what you're talking about is the sunk cost fallacy, whereby you assume that since you've invested so much money, therefore it doesn't make sense to proceed. However, the parliamentary panel notes in its report that since 2012 onwards, there has been a turnaround in the affairs of Air India, and it has been showing incipient signs of progress. Now, the parliamentary panel says that perhaps this is something that should be built upon rather than abdicated. Ultimately, the private sector is not always the best solution. We have seen I think today is an appropriate day to quote the example of Kingfisher Airlines. Vijay Mallya ran it and it did not succeed. In fact, it is accused of a 9,000 crore misappropriation. Its parent company is accused of a 9,000 crore misappropriation. I think we shouldn't be very quick to try and abdicate responsibility. Air India is a national asset, more so because it owns enormous properties and stakeholdings across the country. It is something that if it is well run, can indeed be an example of how a public enterprise should run. Now, the question of Air India being privatized, this is not the first time it is being raised. This question was raised in 2000 as well. When
that's true, but this is the first time the government seems like it's really going to move towards doing it, which is why the political question comes in, that will it have that support? You're right, it's been talked about by a long time, for a long time, but some steps have been taken now.
जी आपका सवाल सही है. Yeah, well, see, the thing is, to me it seems as if there isn't enough clarity on why it is being outsourced to the private sector. It seems as if there is this general presumption, an uninformed presumption, that the private sector will do it well. Now, we haven't seen examples of that. Air India is a government carrier. It has the potential for enormous growth. It employs a very vast number of people. It is more than just a private money-making enterprise. In that regard, you must consider, first, if you have exhausted all particular measures to turn the company around, and that's what the parliamentary panel notes. that you haven't. Second is the question of the fact that Air India derives 60% of its revenue from foreign flights and foreign routes. When a private sector comes, and this is an important source of tax revenue for the government. Now, when a private sector comes in, you will receive a fraction of that. Whatever is left over as profit, and that you will tax at 33% plus 50% surcharge. So I think it comes with a very huge financial cost that must also be looked into.
All right, I've got Jitendra Bhargav here. I'm really keen to get your views on a couple of things, Mr. Bhargav. First, the 49% FDR limit being now applied to Air India as well. Yeah. How attractive is it really at this time with the losses mounting?
See, when are you going to do it? That's the question we must be asking ourselves. Air India only has 14% market share in the domestic and 17% on the international front. You delay it, as the parliamentary committee said, delayed by 5 years, you will see further marginalization, and therefore Air India becomes still lesser attractive. The time is now. Now, government has made its intent known. What do I read in today's decision? That government this time means business will take the disinvestment process to the logical end. 49% is what? It means more players can now bid for Air India. It will not be confined to a small select group of airlines who are flying the Indian skies and say we are going to be bidding. If you really need value and you need somebody who realizes that global, as the earlier speaker very rightly said, you've got a global network. Now you're going to be capitalizing on it. Now no Indian carrier has as much a market share because India is #1 international player. Now, what does this carry? These people in the business know the kind of value Air India has.
Yeah.
Unfortunate part is that we have far too much on the debt, the losses, not on the assets, the kind of business potential it offers to a potential acquirer. Now, these things can't be ignored. No, if you were to get pilots, where do you get pilots for 777 and Dreamliner aircraft in the market readily? Where will you get technicians and engineers who are servicing this aircraft?
In that case, then let's go to the points that this parliamentary panel report has raised. One of which is that the turnaround plan was supposed to be till 2022. Yeah. The money so far has been piecemeal. That's why Air India has not been able to recover. Okay, its profits are increasing. It's doing better. Its losses are going down minimally. So give it more time.
Let's be very fair about it. Parliamentary committee are basically people who are going to take a populist decision. They are no experts in the aviation business. You run, because you committed in 2012 for 10 years, you continue to see the marginalization of Air India as if you don't have enough lessons to learn in the previous 4 years' performance. Now that is one aspect you want to really look at it. The second aspect is who will really take a call in the decision? Is the parliamentary committee going to decide? No. The losses that we are talking about, well, we can compliment, right? That you've done a commendable job because the losses have gone down. Can we overlook the simple fact that ATF prices have been sliding downwards barring the last 3-4 months? Yeah. India is growing at 20% growth. Now ask a simple question to yourself. Because when I was on a panel discussion, when the minister was also, the Air India independent member was also with me, saying that, look, we have performed and we are doing well. I said, if the market has grown by 20% and you grow by 2%, it is not good performance. And don't compare, like, unfortunate part is that Air India has been comparing its performance vis-a-vis its previous year's performance rather than with its competing airlines. Now, you have to be realistic. Parliamentary committee, I've been saying it, the Ministry of Civil Aviation has failed in one thing, to disseminate the information to the parliamentarians and the public at large. Why is it so? Because once a CMD and the ministry bureaucrats have been in place for a certain time, they start defending their own action. Rather than questioning Air India that, look, you need to be improving your performance and these are the weaknesses, you started endorsing and make statements in Parliament to that effect.
Because effectively, if you're saying Air India is not doing that badly, reflects well on you. But I want to ask Ejaz Ilmi.
No, hold it. Our time were different and these times were different. And I have written in a book very clearly when the accounts were not being presented correctly and what were systemic weaknesses. I've been saying ever since Air India got into this situation, has anybody ventured to correct the systemic weaknesses?
Okay, let's look forward.
Just one final point here, that there are two parameters in which neither competition nor government Ministry of Civil Aviation plays a role. That's the on-time performance of an airline and the occupancy factor. On both these counts, Air India counts amongst the last. Why hasn't anything been shown in the last 4 years? If I was to address the parliamentary committee, I will show these factors and say,
no,
look,
I think,
where is the improvement that you're talking about?
I think that the national carrier is in trouble is no secret. It's well known. My question now, Ejaz Ilmi, forward looking, is that what is the government doing to push this process now that there is a stated purpose? There have been no clear buyers coming forward as of now. How will you move to make it an attractive sale without compromising on factors like employees? That's going to be one very sticky factor coming in. And you know what you're going to do with this huge behemoth that has been created over decades.
Well, undoubtedly so. It is a tricky proposition. But that doesn't mean that this government, the Modi government, is going to shy away from the fact that we are facing a situation where a completely stripped down, denuded, debased national carrier, which has enjoyed a preeminent position, has actually been driven to the ground literally and is now showing certain incipient signs, as my friend Mohammad Ali Khan spoke about. But these signs are obviously, these are signs what the potential is all about. If we continue to wait, then the further denuding factors will come into play and the market value of the Maharajah of the Air India national carrier will go further depleted. Yes, there are issues on assets, a lot of which assets have to come in the book, they have to be reconciled. So there are complicated procedures involved, but the government is not intending to shy away, and today's announcement goes in that step that it's a level playing field, it's a global world, Maharajah has been a global brand, let the best airlines come and vie for it, which is why the changes have come into place as 49% goes. Secondly, I must say that my friend spoke about what are the examples? Well, Qantas was totally owned by the Australian government. The British Airways was totally owned by the British government. The KLM was totally owned by Dutch government. It's only when the private sector moved in and private sector management took over these airlines in the last 15, 20, 30 years that you've seen a great turnaround. It is a well-known global fact that privately run airlines occupy the top 10 airlines globally.
All right. And Mr. Mohammad Khan, I'm sure you will also agree that time to stop spending beyond a point taxpayer money on an airline for nostalgic or sentimental reasons, things like whether they will come through in times of crisis, can be even imposed on private carriers as they are if the situation arises.
Well, I was listening intently to what Dr. Ilmi was saying. He's one of the few people in the BJP who actually does his research, and I often refer to him as the thinking man spokesperson. But the examples of Qantas and British Airways are not appropriate examples. It is akin to comparing apples to oranges, because the economic situation there, the policies that allow these companies to prosper are completely different. I feel that in this entire process, as we've seen over the last 48 hours, the BJP government has been unable to give a roadmap for why it feels that Air India cannot be revived. And if those challenges are indeed so deep and persistent, then what makes you feel that a private carrier will be able to, a private party will be able to turn them around? Second, Mr. Bhargav is right. A parliamentary panel, it is comprised of generalists, but it is also the remit of the parliamentary panel to invite experts and record their testimony in its parliamentary report. Any standing committee or parliamentary committee does this before arriving at its findings.
No, that's
I wouldn't
fair
say
enough.
that it's therefore the opinion of laymen, and I certainly don't think it's being done for sentimental reasons. I don't think it's being done for sentimental or nostalgic reasons.
Right.
I want to say this: the BJP government was the government that carried out disinvestment vis-a-vis Centaur and Balco. But those were piffling, a fraction of the size of Air India. So when you do something like this, you need to think over it 100 times. You can't just make a glib statement that we're going to privatize it and that will solve everything.
Well, the attempts have not met with too much success right now. So clearly the government will have to sweeten the deal if Air India has to find a buyer anytime soon. Thank you so much, Mr. Bhargav, Mohammad Khan and Aadhaar Ilmi for joining us this evening on the first Primetime debate.
Thank you.
it's nothing short of a rehaul of the Aadhaar system. After raising privacy and security concerns over the vulnerabilities in Aadhaar, the UIDAI has decided to implement a new method of identification that protects the user's Aadhaar number. Now, instead of giving your Aadhaar number as identity proof, you will have to provide a virtual ID that will be generated each time. It is a random number and it's not possible to get the Aadhaar number from this virtual ID. Apart from this, there are new restrictions of which agencies can keep and store Aadhaar numbers. A UID token will be used for those entities that are not allowed to store Aadhaar numbers. Importantly, the UID token will make sure databases are not merged. Remember, that was a big concern. So is this version of Aadhaar safer? And do the changes assuage concerns about privacy? To talk about this, I'm joined this evening by Nikhil Kumar of the iSpirit Foundation and cyber law advocate Pawan Duggal. Thank you so much for speaking with us this evening on Primetime Debate. Mr. Duggal, do you think that this is good enough? Because if you remember what the primary concerns were, that your Aadhaar number is available very easily, your Aadhaar number is linked to a lot of key information about you, and there are often private and third-party vendors who have access to it. Now, this new system effectively cuts all of that out?
Well, as a concept, the concept of virtual identity seems attractive, but the devil is going to be in the detail. It will have to be yet seen what kind of technical parameters will have to be fulfilled at the back end so as to protect not just data privacy, but also personal privacy of individuals. Also, the current today's statement does not give the slightest of clues of what kind of cyber security parameters and essential elements have been incorporated as part of this virtual identity. Well, this concept of virtual identity looks very good, but the question is, it's going to be ultimately based on access to the Aadhaar website. Now, in a country where web literacy is not very high, expecting that all Indians are going to jump onto the UIDAI website to create this virtual identity token is a tall task. Further, this entire issue is not yet legally tested in the sense that the Aadhaar Act 2016 does not provide legal sanctity or validity to the concept of a virtual identity. So I think while this is good news, the current statement comes in as an implicit admission by the UIDAI for the first time in its history that yes, Aadhaar numbers are being leaked, are being stored by various stakeholders on their systems, and it's time to go ahead and beef the Aadhaar ecosystem. But please understand, you have given yourself a timeline of about 4 months to which you will transmigrate onto the new system. The requisite foundations on which the system is based has to be seen. Further, you have to be alive of the fact that large number of people have unauthorized access to the Aadhaar database, which means that the said unauthorized access can also be used for the purposes of regenerating false or fabricated virtual identities, which ultimately may render the entire thing not very effective. So I think we'll have to wait for more details from the UIDAI in terms of the technicalities, the cybersecurity issues, and the legalities before we can really comment. But this statement actually represents a fundamental landmark shift in the thinking of the UIDAI.
Absolutely,
it's a different system. Approach
it's a different system.
Is now being given up.
Sure, you're right, Mr. Duggal. It's a different system on how Aadhaar will be implemented. I just want to make one clarification because I've had a chance to look at that circular, and you mentioned that, you know, will all users be able to go to the Aadhaar app or to the portal and generate their Aadhaar? But just to clarify, the circular does say all agencies using Aadhaar authentication and eKYC services shall ensure Aadhaar number holders can provide a 16-digit VID within their application. So one assumes from this very broadly that every agency which is collecting your Aadhaar, be it a bank or a telecom provider, service provider, whoever, will have to give you some option of generating that Aadhaar number within their setup as well, which will possibly make it easier. Nikhil Kumar also joins us. He's been a defender of Aadhaar. Nikhil, one question which has been raised, and this is a quote from Pranesh Prakash a little while earlier, is why keep it voluntary? Why not make it mandatory? Why not make it mandatory so that even citizens who may not be aware of possible misuse of their Aadhaar number are protected?
See, this is the issue with people. When something is mandatory, they say, why isn't it voluntary? When something is made voluntary, people say, why isn't it made mandatory? I think what is the right design for any system to be done is give the option back to the user, and the user will decide what is right for him. To debunk what Mr. Pawan Dugal said, he's completely wrong in making an assertion to say that people will not have access to generate the VID. As you clearly mentioned in the 6th point issued in the circular today, UIDAI very clearly says that UIDAI will provide various options to the Aadhaar number holder to generate their VID, to retrieve their VID, and this will be done via the resident portal. It will be done via Aadhaar Enrollment Center, Aadhaar mobile application, and more such. So I think giving this feature back to the user will allow the user to use it the way he wants. I don't think it's the right design to make anything mandatory because there are 400 to 500 million people who do not have access to the internet or phones, as we know. So we should take this as we go along. I think what is more important today is we should commend the government, we should commend UIDAI for coming out with design system. This arguably makes Aadhaar the most sophisticated digital identity system in the world. Virtual IDs have been spoken about in theory for a long time. Implementing this in real time, going live in the next 4 months, we should now as an ecosystem come together, help UIDAI implement this rather than sit and criticize whether they are.
May I just come in there? While we commend the government for action, as you said, and rightly so, isn't this an admission that there was a problem? Because, you know, we've spoken about Aadhaar most of this week on Primetime Debate. It's been in the news, right from the Tribune article to the, RBI affiliated organization study. And there were clear signs that there was a problem. But through all of it, the response has always been, where is the breach? Where is the issue? What has happened? No one had the biometrics. At the very least, Nikhil, today you'll be sporting enough to admit that there was a problem and UIDAI has recognized that problem and now has sought to fix it.
No, you're absolutely right. I think it will be naive to say that the solution is a knee-jerk solution. As I understand, this has been in works for a long time. As Nandan Nilekani, who was the first chairman of UIDAI, in an interview said, the concept of virtual ID is not new. This was spoken about in a paper in 2010. However, the time was not right. This has been in works for some time. I think more than I think we should definitely look at this with the right spirit to say that it's not about, it's not about saying whether they've admitted to something wrong. Is this the need of the hour? Will this improve security? Will this improve privacy? And please note, any digital system or any software is a continuous evolution process. And I would actually laud this as an innovation rather than a stopgap fix.
Sure. Pawan Dugal, I just want your comment on a couple of points. One is limited KYC, where UIDAI will now separate authentication agencies into global and local. From what I've gone through in the circular, it's not very clear on what parameters they'll decide who is global and who is local, and who should be allowed to keep the Aadhaar numbers and who should not. Do you think that that is something which needs more clarity?
I think this entire circular is only a mother statement document. It does not have any adequate details, either in terms of technicalities or in terms of cyber security or the other specific details which are going to actually populate the entire ecosystem. Well, the question of the matter is, at the end of the day, the devil will be in the detail. So when you're talking of this distinction between global versus local authorities and which is going to be allowed access versus which is not, again, you are coming up with a subjective interpretation. The question is there a guarantee that the global guys will be far more protected than the Indian guys? Will there be any kind of mechanisms to help us define how to demarcate between the global versus the local? So I think all these is ultimately a matter of detail. So while there's a lot of rejoicing happening that virtual identities is great and India should rejoice, the fact remains it's a good concept, but then it's too early to even comment right now. So merely debunking each other doesn't going to help. At the end of the day, the UIDAI has still held its cards very close to its chest. It's not come out in the public domain as to what its exact day-to-day mechanism or process is going to be. I'm not so sure for a student like me on Aadhaar to know how this virtual identities will be granted legalities, number one.
Okay.
Number two, how will it actually ensure that cyber security breaches are adequately prevented? And finally, people still have access to unauthorized access to Aadhaar, which can be used for the purposes of misusing the virtual identity.
You know,
please understand, we're not just talking about the Aadhaar central identities data repository, we're talking about the ecosystem, which is completely unsafe. And it's a much bigger challenge going forward when we talk of virtual identities in an unsecure Aadhaar ecosystem.
Yeah, you know, Mr. Duggal, I just want to ask you about the unique tokens because if you remember, the biggest fear was the merging of the database, that once you have someone's Aadhaar number and access to the database, you know their telephone number, you know their bank account number, you know their PAN card, you know everything about them. Now, because of this system, agencies will not be able to merge databases. That means every agency will not have every kind of detail. That's where limited KYC also comes in. Will that not be a big relief to a prime concern?
I don't understand from where are you reading this. I don't find that anywhere specifically written in the circular.
It's point number 11 in the circular, page 4.
This is only talking about virtual identities and the fact that it will be disposal. Yeah. Yeah, when you look at point number 11, it's obviously very clear that they have just tried to give broad directions. How will it actually work on the ground? How are you going to divest authorities who already have their Aadhaars onto their systems? How is the Aadhaar going to be destroyed? What is going to be the relevant ramifications in terms of retention of such unauthorized Aadhaar sister numbers which are existing on the platforms of various stakeholders? In fact, this circular is clearly recognized that there's a misuse of the saving of Aadhaar numbers on various platforms by service providers. So I think this requires a more holistic approach. It's good development in the sense that Aadhaar is looking at alternate ways like virtual identity. Okay. But again, too early to really comment because the Aadhaar march forward towards the complete transformation into a virtual identity will have to be beefed up with appropriate
details. I want to take that point to Nikhil as a last comment. 4 more months before this is implemented, so far nearly all of the population, 86% plus of the population has an Aadhaar number and has been giving it liberally everywhere. Isn't it like shutting the doors after the horse is bolted, Nikhil? What happens to all of the data which is floating out there?
No, absolutely not. First of all, let me clarify. Global AUAs and local AUAs doesn't mean it's a foreign entity or a local entity. It's just two categories. I would request the panelists to please read through the circular in detail and not spread confusion amongst the viewers. Number two, on your question specifically on is it too late? I think the use case for Aadhaar has been largely in government using Aadhaar for various different services. As you know, there has been an approach to link various different government schemes with Aadhaar, and the objective of doing that was to basically remove ghosts and so on and so forth. But I actually would argue to say that the real use of Aadhaar would be by the private ecosystem. It will be the startups who are going to build new financial inclusion products. It will be, the government who are trying to build health inclusion products. I think we should not be delusional and keep talking about use words like privacy, cyber security, and so on and so forth. And forget about all the other people in India. There are 1 billion people in India. 600 million people in India don't have access to sanitation. 700 million people in India.
Just to put things in perspective, the Supreme Court today commented on Aadhaar being used for shelter homes and asked why those who don't have an Aadhaar should be kept out. Are they not Indians? So, one thing I really see in an Aadhaar debate, and whenever I do one, is how hardened the positions are on either side. Maybe there is some middle ground. Hopefully we can find it. Thank you so much, Nikhil Kumar and Pawan Duggal, for joining us this evening on the second Primetime debate. And before we go, a couple of comments that have come in. Thank you so much, all of you who are watching and writing in. We really appreciate it. So Sampak Kranti says on Facebook, no matter if it is a 2-stage or a 3-4-stage security system, it is worthless. Well, he's not too happy. A couple of comments on Air India as well. which have come in. Prabir Kumar Chakravarti says we need a public sector company to protect cartels of private sector. Private sector isn't efficient exclusively. Free it from political interferences. Well, that's a tough one as far as Air India is concerned. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us this evening on Primetime Debate. Stay tuned to BloombergQuint.com.